Welcome back to another episode of Bonfire Conversations. I'm your host, Hamidreza Nikufar, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with a true icon in the world of game design. Someone whose work has been a guiding light for many. Harvey Smith. Harvey's career has been nothing short of legendary, with his influence seen in some of the most iconic and beloved immersive sims of all time, from Deus Ex to Dishonored. His creative vision has shaped the way we think about player agency, storytelling, and the very essence of games as a form of escapism. But beyond his groundbreaking work in game design, Harvey is a person with an incredible life story, one that spans decades, cultures, and profound experiences. In our conversations, we dove deep into the origins of his creativity, the cultural influences that shaped him, and the story of his first meeting with Raphael Colantonio, founder of Arkane Studios. We also explored his views on deep topics like aging, generational changes, and his future projects. It was a heartfelt, insightful discussion that left me feeling inspired and emotional. I hope it does the same for you. Before we begin, please make sure to subscribe to Bonfire Conversations if you're enjoying the show. The podcast is available on YouTube and all the major streaming platforms. Now let's dive into my conversation with Harvey Smith.
I've always wanted to talk to you, but never found the perfect moment. And honestly, I hate rejections, so I was even afraid to ask for an interview. But finally, I mentioned it to Raph, like, hey, do you think it's a good idea to ask Harvey now? And bam, the next thing I know, you're looped in the email. So it feels surreal, at least for me, is to get emails from people who've had such a huge influence on my life. I mean, I grew up with your games, with Raph's work starting from Arx Fatalist and you with Deus Ex. So it's always fascinating to connect with people who've left a meaningful mark somewhere in an art form. Long story short, this is a special moment for me, so I can't thank you enough. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for the kind words. Raph is a dear friend, and I know what you mean because, you know, I have my own people that have had an impact on me like that, and I have stories I could tell about when I met this person or that person, and this one was a disappointment, but this one was amazing. And, one way or the other, the focus is on the work, right? Because the team makes the work in most cases. And, it's really like the work that is the thing that leaves the impact. So even if someone's disappointing, it's the work that you remember, you don't want that to take away from the work, right? But anyway, hopefully I won't be disappointed, but you know what I mean.
No way. So yeah, we mentioned Raph earlier, and he's such a nice dude. He's done so much for me, and I've spoken to so many people around the world and who have nothing but praises for him. I'm curious about the first time you met him, and how did you guys meet, and what was your first impression of him?
Well, I'm going to have to lock my dog out of the room here. He's being very needy. The thing is, there's the first time I really met Raph, and then there's the first time we kind of became friends, which is much later. The first time I met Raph I was kind of nobody at Origin Systems. I was a QA lead transitioning to an associate producer in War Inspector's group. I had worked a little bit with, my first project was a Chris Roberts project, Wing Commander 3DO. And then after that, I worked a little bit with Richard Garriott on or with War Inspector on System Shock I was only in QA. I was the QA lead for like 10 months. And I worked with Richard Garriott on Ultima 8, which had launched and was a disappointment, but we needed to add, there was some voice files we were going to add for the elementals in the game. We also had a list I made of 100 things that we would like to fix. We didn't fix all of them, but we fixed many of them. So I had worked with these guys, and while working on System Shock, I had the pleasure of working with Doug Church, who would go on to be like a friend and a mentor and just an amazing guy. But anyway, along this process of becoming a developer, was starting at the bottom of the ladder, making $7 an hour in QA. I didn't even have a computer. I had a 3DO machine and a clipboard. I would also work with a lot of people from QA. It turned out to be the best job I could have taken. I thought I wanted to be a designer or a writer at the time, but really what I needed was to get into QA, and see everybody. So I worked with programmers, I worked with artists, I worked with marketing, once in a while the legal team would come down and ask me a question, so I worked with everybody because the QA person knows the game so well and they're willing to do just about anything. Well, one day HR asked me, my friend Norma in HR was like, hey, we have a group of people coming in for a tour of Origin. Would you like to give the tour? And I was like, yeah, I would love to do that. And so she started coming by to me whenever we had a tour. And sometimes it went really well. Sometimes it went badly. But one tour, one day, I was giving everybody the tour, taking them from place to place. There was one guy in the tour. And he was visiting from the French office or something. Or the English office. Raph worked in Slough for a while. And I don't know if he was bad weather, which is he's the worst person in the world for being seasonally affected disorder, like when the weather is bad, his mood goes down. And he had the fact that, and he loves, good food, Italian, French food, etc. The fact that he had to live in Slough, England, which is apparently a terrible place where the first Office show was filmed, and it's rainy and all that. But anyway, he was either there or he was back in France. I don't know where he was at, maybe which office he was with, but he was kind of like me, but in France. I think he worked in QA at the time, and I loved Underworld so much, and System Shock had come into test, so I started testing System Shock. And I think Raph was over in Europe playing it and freaking out. We both love the same kind of games. These games that were like, put you there, it's first person perspective, you're exploring the world, there's physics, there's AI, you can lean around the corner, all this kind of stuff. And there was one guy on the tour that was just so excited, and we talk off and on, and then we give him another part of the tour. And that day was the first time I ever met Raph, and I didn't really even realize it at the time. I don't know if he realized it at the time that we would go on to be very important to one another. And then it was years in the future where we would meet at GDC. And do you remember we met, and we both were very into, and at the time I was working on Deus Ex, and they were working on Arx Fatalis, or they started Arx Fatalis, I think, around the time that we were about to ship Deus Ex. And so it was like these parallels where we kept trying to come together. He visited Austin at one point to show me Arx Fatalis 2, which eventually became Dark Messiah Might and Magic. We showed him what we were working on. It was like both just in love with the same kind of game and love talking about it, very passionate. It was one of the meetings that would be one of the most important to my career, basically. And of course, we laughed constantly. He's like really funny, and we both have an irreverent sense of humor, and we both like doing funny voices, and it's just like funny expressions and sayings, and also both understanding the world. The world has changed so much since we met. If you think about it, we probably met in 1994 or something like that. And if you just think about how much the world has changed in 30 years, it's radical, right? And so I would be lying if I said I understood everything 30 years ago as well as I do today. It's an ongoing process of understanding the industry and creativity and how to negotiate with other strong-willed people, but also politics and art and life and marriage and everything. And Raph has been a part of that, my life experience. And I think the big reason, of course, is he moved to Austin at some point. And I was living in Austin, and I was going to go work on BioShock 2 with some friends, but Raph was like, hey, you should come work with me. And I was like, I don't know, a little French company that I don't speak French, and I don't know what they're going to do next, but I just had a feeling about them. I would hang out with Raph or with Christophe Carrier or Julian Roby or one of those guys, and I just had a strong feeling about how amazing they were. One of the founders, Marco Mele, is another good friend, and Sebastian Mitton and Jean-Luc Monet, their art team is staggeringly good. Eventually, we would build that place up to just be a powerhouse. Dinga's there now and all those people. But just initially, Raph and interviewing with Christophe and Julian, I was like, there's something here. Sometimes things don't add up on paper, but you're like, this is better for me right now. And so I signed on as a partner at Arkane, and Raph and I, at first we tried to direct our own games, and then at some point we were like, we need to combine forces. And along the way, Dishonored happened, and that was just like one of the best experiences. It was very hard. It was from beginning to end, to the accolades later, shipping Dishonored and seeing how it affected me and my friend Raph. Like he had always felt like if he worked hard enough, people would recognize his talent, his passion, the team that he had built and their skills. And it was great to be there for that payoff where he just felt like the world rewarded him. And for me, it was like, will this happen again, or was it a fluke? Like after Deus Ex, it's where do you go from there? It's hard, like, and so shipping Dishonored, which we just constantly get told by people how much the game meant to them and how much they play it and how meaningful it was, which is really what it's all about, Like I'm working on this. I'm in between companies right now. I'm trying to get something funded, So I'm working on these 2 books for D&D, a book of monsters with innovative mechanics and a book of magic items with innovative mechanics. And I'm certain that both books will lose money. I'm positive because I know how much I'm spending on artists. I know how much I'm spending on the and how much time of my time, a year. And yet when I think about other people playing the game and the DM is using my monsters and the people are having adventures around the monsters, and it doesn't just end after one fight, but the kind of monsters I like to make have hooks into other ongoing play. That is so thrilling for me. And so when people talk about like a game, where we made the game, and there was a time when I was a level designer, I was like sitting there making maps in Deus Ex. Then there's a time where I'm just directing the game and other people are doing that work. But either way, whatever part of development you had, when the game is finished and you put it out and it's polished, if it's polished, it's not always polished, and people play it and they just lose themselves. They forget about their stresses. They forget about maybe who just won the presidential election. They forget about the fact that they have no money in the bank right now. For a little while, with a good book or a movie or a game, it's like making love. Your mind goes away, your problems go away, yourself goes away at some level, and you're just like, you're in this place. And for me, whether it's whatever, no matter what kind of game it is, that is like, as they say, that's the juice. That's the thing that I love. So
yeah,
that was a long-winded answer for how I met.
That was a perfect answer. Yeah, that was a perfect answer. And yeah, sometimes it's kind of like meditating work. Like it doesn't matter if it makes money or something. I'm just doing it for my own sanity and more for my pleasure, and that's worth like a lot. Yeah. So
right, like why do you do podcasts? Why specifically?
I don't do podcasts. The podcast is just a side thing for me. I'm a game developer. I'm focused on the music and sound. But podcast was something that I've been doing for a long time. But more importantly, is just to meet people and learn from them.
Yeah.
So I know like a lot about the design, like art direction, anything. It's just for curiosity. It's not making money, but it's just like,
so
I'm talking to Harvey Smith.
Raph, or so rather, your passion is really the audio and the music.
Yeah.
And but then like you obviously, lots of people do audio and music without doing a podcast. So there's obviously some other thing about you where it's like talking to people, connecting to people.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I see. Interesting.
Yeah,
so is that how you know Raph through the music, by the way?
No, actually, yeah, maybe. I know him through Ken Levine. Actually,
okay.
At one point I asked, hey, for my next guest, whom do you suggest? And he's like, would you like to talk to Raph? And I was like, really? And then, bam, just like how he introduced you to me, Levine introduced me to Raph, and we kicked it off. And it was during I think the time that he was kind of like establishing the band. And yeah, we kept in touch, and it's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, so if I'm correct, you were born in 1966 and grew up in 70s, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So the 60s and 70s in America are like a dream time for me. And if I had a time machine, I would go right there. So each decade, especially pivotal ones like 60s and 70s, carries its own distinctive culture and mindset.
Yeah.
And I believe we inherit a lot of it as teenagers. So when you look back at those times, do you see connection between the cultural movements of that era on your creative process today? And do you feel they left an imprint on your brain that influences how you think and create now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think you're right. Very much Generation X. I really came of age during the 80s, but the 70s were a huge influence on me because I was a child growing up. And the way you grew up back then was much more open, free range. Like we would get up in the morning, read some comics, eat some cereal, ride our bikes all across the town to meet our friends. That's when D&D was developed. And I'm a little bit on the older side of Generation X, so my interests span the 70s music and the 80s music, and you obviously had a lot of great rock based on blues, and you had a lot of punk that came about in the 70s. And then you had new wave and all of that shit that I love, the emo, Cure, kind of Joy Division stuff. And like, I think those things are influential over me. Of course, it's the kind of video games I want to make, I guess, are like very much influenced by D&D. Like, you are there, and what do? Here's your tools. You don't have weapons only, you have tools also. And you're the player. We want you to be creative and be the centerpiece. And this is not just a story being told to you. It's a story you're influencing. But the other big influence, of course, on people is what their parents went through. And I would say, my father was a child of the 50s and my mother was a child of the 60s. And that's definitely, they had a dichotomy. Like, he was very like, sort of like, how do you say it? Like, he was very much like, at the time there was a big schism, right? Between sort of like law and order type people and 60s experimental, like, I don't even know how to say it, a little more chaotic, into drugs and music. And my mom and dad were the opposite forces like that. And they didn't last long together, but they both had some kind of influence over me. And so really I live in their shadow, even though neither one of them lasted very long. But like, so as much as like the cultural forces of the time, I think you're influenced by your parents as well. And there are probably periods that are pretty, what do you say, calm and peaceful, bucolic or whatever. And then there are other periods like now that are very intense. And you have to wonder, like, what is the impact on kids? And the 60s definitely like that. I don't remember, I don't think probably anything from the 60s because I was 3 when the 60s ended or whatever. But like, but I definitely remember people talking about Richard Nixon and about Vietnam and about how the government was lying and about how people were just going over there to die. And there were the youth rising up and rebelling against that, and the music being a part of that. And the boomer generation, who I'm not super fond of it at times because they all became the Fox News generation. But they had a collective thing. Like, they all listened to the same music, right? They weren't very, there were probably stratifications or, divisions, of course. But like, when something happened, like a new album, like Pet Sounds came out or Jimi Hendrix did something or whatever, everybody was like at least aware of it, right? It influenced people. And then the world by the 80s was very much like, well, there's at least 6 tracks that everybody's on. And if your track doesn't overlap with somebody else's track, and nowadays it's just, the ultimate scattering of culture. people talk about things. Somebody was talking about somebody the other day, and I've never heard of them, the musician or whatever. And the last movie I saw was Honora, and it's like one of the best movies I've seen in years. And I don't even think I've talked to anybody else who's seen it, And it's just weird how media, there's so much stuff, so many games. There's so many games. It used to be that everybody knew all the video games. This is simplistic, but everybody had played Lunar Lander, and everybody had played Defender, and everybody had played Phoenix. Dragon's Lair came along, and it was these animation clips, and you chose between them. And everybody knew that, and everybody knew the Atari cartridges. And now people talk about video games, and I'm like, oh, I don't play those at all. That kind of strategy game or that kind of shooter. Or Raph and I always like to joke that we're like the two old men in the Muppets that sit in the balcony making fun of, everything around them, laughing, because we just feel like aliens sometimes. Like everybody talks about this game or that game, and it's like, nah, whatever. And then a game comes out that we really, really love, like when Fallout 3 came out, it's a great example, or Fallout New Vegas, or any of the big Fallout games. In fact, the original Fallout games, the original XCOM games, but certainly when Underworld, when Thief, when System Shock, when Terra Nova, when any of those games came out, like nowadays, it's rarer, but like periodically there'll just be something that blows our minds, and we can't shut up about it, and we can't stop thinking about it, and we text each other constantly. And I put hundreds of hours into Elden Ring. The game just grabbed me. And the game I played before that I dedicated a lot of time was called Inscription, and I just played and played. I played through three of the different modes of the game. And then I finally was just like, this game never ends. And I was out, I get so deeply into things that I love, and I just don't have time for things that I don't. And, right now I'm playing D&D like 3 times a week, so it's like a little bit obsessive. And I feel like Raph and I share that, where we're either checked out or we're obsessive about something, And so you can't count on us for like a super broad overview. But when you find the right channel, we go deep on it. But yeah, I think I still listen to modern music too. When like Billie Eilish does something, or Churches or whatever, I'm into modern stuff. But I still listen to music from the 70s and 80s, and I still love the films of the 70s so much. But to me, I have this argument with my friend Richard Rouse, who's a creative director. He made The Suffering and some other games. He's a really smart guy. But he's a huge film aficionado, the way Warren Spector is, by the way. And he loves old films. And I was like, okay, every now and then there's an old film like Casablanca that I love, But really, it's Taxi Driver. It's from the 70s forward that films start feeling to me like we understand cinema here, and so I don't know. It's cool to be influenced by different things. I also, during the pandemic, I got deeply into the 1920s, and I ran a D&D campaign for a year, 13 months, that was set in, it's called Glyden, and it was set in the 20s, and it wasn't gangster. It was more like Great Gatsby with magic. And I truly loved it. And the group that I was with, we dug deeply into the dances and the fashion and the music and the cocktails and all of that stuff, the architecture, and we built all of that into the campaign, and it was really, really fun, really interesting. And it was crazy at the time too, because they were just coming out of a pandemic as well, and there had been people against masks, and people worried about vaccines, and then wild wealth inequality because they stopped taxing the rich or whatever, and then a crash that followed it, of course, and then like populism, where like a leader rises up that is like, not on the whole very balanced or very healthy. And so Yeah. Anyway, there were so many parallels between that period and the period we were going through that I was just kind of stunned, you know. Anyway, yes,
Yeah,
stuff. I agree.
it's interesting. I was thinking about what you said. I mean, your generation. I was born on 1991. But your generation, I mean, the music, I'm like, when you get a music, you would listen to it all over and over, or if there was a game or a movie was coming out, everything was special because of I think, quality over quantity. But I think my generation, at least for me, I try to, like, let's talk about games. I try to play everything that comes out of curiosity. I can't like sleep. Like, I gotta see what this is, even if it's like 1 or 2 hours. But weirdly, the new generation, younger than me, they don't even give it a chance. They just read headlines or like go to YouTube and watch their YouTubers saying, "Oh, this game is shit. This game is good." So okay, I'm not gonna try it. I'm gonna play it. So it's just, even, I mean, the work of art going out is just like not experienced, but judged like before even, give it a chance, because there are too many things going on. Last week I was talking to the CTO of IO Interactive working on Hitman games, and he said something interesting, that he said, we're not competing for the customer's money, we're competing for the customer's time, because everything is out there and it's just like a streaming and all that. But how do we convince them, like, okay, give your time to this? And it shows. Yeah, that's why, for me at least, 60s and 70s and all that era, 80s are so special. Everything was celebrated, everything was so unique, and everyone was excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for everything that you just said, there was somebody that hated it or somebody that criticized it, or the culture wars back then, and there were people saying music's not supposed to be like this. I would recommend the movie. I guess I know Woody Allen is kind of a creep, but like his movie Midnight in Paris is a really great movie with regard to like romanticizing a past period or whatever, I think. But anyway, I was gonna say, I'm much too old to comment on the new generation and what they're going through. They have my ultimate sympathy and my help and, whatever. But like, it must be crazy to be growing up right now, because their attention is so fractured and they weren't encouraged to like be autonomous, right? Like I was talking to a friend the other day and she was saying, remember before cell phones, when you wanted to hang out with your friends, you may stop by where they work. You drive over to where they work and say, "Hey, it's so-and-so here." Or you go to their house and knock on the door, and maybe their parents would answer the door, or their roommate or whatever. And they would say, "Oh, she's not here right now." "Oh, okay, cool. Tell her I came by," and you'd leave. And if they were there, you might say, "Hey, you want to go to a movie tonight?" "Oh, I can't because of blah, blah, blah." Because the world was very like, there's nothing to do at home except maybe read a book or whatever.
Yeah.
And you can only do that so much. So you would go out into the world and do things, try to make something happen. And now we've got a society where everything comes to you. And I mean everything. Like all the books ever written can come to me lying on my bed or my couch. Yeah. I can order food. I can talk to friends. I can do anything lying on my couch with the phone in my hand. And I'm not a Luddite or whatever. I use my phone a lot. I work a lot on my phone, and I'm into all that as well. But I did a couple of years ago uninstall all social media from my phone, and I immediately noticed that I was playing more games, I was talking to friends more, etc. So I just think I read this person saying, there was an article. It was like, why does it take so long now in restaurants? It used to be quicker. And so the person doing the research got access to, I think, if I'm not remembering this incorrectly, they got access to old footage of restaurant experience. You know, like, oh, somebody accidentally recorded a bunch of New York restaurants in the 80s. Let's look at those. And then they set up cameras and they watch modern restaurant experiences. And they compared it doesn't take any more time to cook an egg or a piece of chicken or whatever than it used to. It doesn't take any more time to walk over and say, have you looked at the menu? What would you like today? In fact, paying is quicker now, right? You don't have to walk around with the money back to the register, and it's quicker. You do it right there. So why does it take, on average, 30 minutes more to eat dinner at some place? And what they saw over and over in the video footage in the modern world is people pull out their phones, and before they order, they're all on their phones, and then the waiter comes by, oh, we're not ready yet, and then they start to pay, but they haven't paid yet because they're on their phones. They take a phone break. They take a phone break when they're in line with the hostess, and then they take a phone break before they order. Maybe they take a phone break in the middle of the meal. They take a phone break at the end before they pay. And it's like this cell phone thing, the smartphone thing, we still don't understand all the ways that it has enhanced us and maimed us. You know, I think it has maimed us in some way. It's maimed human connection. It's maimed self-confidence, you know. And so schools are starting to experiment with taking the phones away, and the students rebel against it at first, and some of the parents are worried about it. But when it's done, the students later say, thank the stars we did this, because now I talk to my friends. And anyway, what were we talking about? The new generation and how they interact with things. I mean, I don't blame them, because there's just, there's something vying for their attention constantly. They're not encouraged to like put things down and leave the virtual world and go out into the real world. You know, it's a bit condescending to tell someone to go touch grass, but there's also some wisdom that, like, if you and your friends went camping and none of you took phones, you'd probably remember it for the rest of your life, you know. Whereas if you spend the weekend doing the same thing that you always do, playing a little Fortnite, being on the phone, whatever, ordering pizza, it just blurs into all the same shitty kind of experience that most of your life is all about, probably. And that's a little cynical, and I apologize if it's offensive or whatever, but I do think we're in an age where we have not figured out yet how to manage this powerful device that we now have. And we want more and more convenience, right? Of course. But sometimes it's too much of a good thing. Sometimes things being inconvenient is how you have great memories. Like, what is that old quote? I can't remember, but like, being lost is an adventure misconsidered or something. It's like, you could say, oh, fuck, we're lost. Or you could say, hey, we get to go on an adventure because I don't know where we're at. We're in Berlin and I have no idea how to get to where we're going. I lived in Germany for 3 years back in the late 80s. And I lived in a little tiny village called Kleinersbach in the attic of this family. And there were no cell phones back then, right? And I have a terrible sense of direction. I was lost all the time. And then I also lived in France many decades later, after Dishonored, so like 2013 to 2017 or something. I lived in France for 4 years, and we had smartphones, and I never was lost, never was bored, always had, and I could even translate stuff. And on one hand, it's way more convenient. On the other hand, it's much less of an adventure, And I think you could probably, to bring this back to video games, you can also look at a lot of the video games that are made today. Then there's just this massive encouragement to make them more convenient, to make them more similar to everything else so that everybody's comfortable and knows what they're looking at, to remember everything for the player, to track it all, to remind the player, to polish off all the rough edges. And when I think back on some of my best experiences ever, like when Thief came out, and I'm down in the wine cellar, and there's a guard walking a patrol nearby, and there's a servant, and I sneak up behind the servant and knock them out. And it's a little clunky. If I get caught, it maybe is a little unfair, but like, the emotional spike will be huge, because then I can't fight really. If somebody yells, I'm not a good fighter. That's the key to thief, is that you're weak, you're vulnerable. And so I knocked a servant out, and I have the body, and I'm looking around, but I hear the guard coming. Oh shit, this guard is coming. So I lay the servant down on the edge of the room goes to the river, because theoretically someone was influenced by Tolkien, and they can put the wine barrels in the river and they flow down or whatever. And so there's a ramp. So I put the servant down and I go hide under the table or something. Then the guard is doing his patrol route, and he doesn't see me, but I'm trying really hard not to kill anyone. And I look over, the guard's mumbling and walking around. I look over, and the servant I knocked down, I put her too close to the ramp, and she's slowly sliding toward the river. And I was like, oh my God, I wonder if when you're knocked out in this game, if you go in the water, you should drown, right? That's the way it should work. And so she slides into the water, but I can't come out and grab her or anything because the guard is right there walking around the room. And I just hear the death gasp, the death rattle from the unconscious person in the water. Oh. And I was like, God, she died knocked out in the fucking water. And that was like, that game is hard to play. It's hard to figure out. You can't kill zombies unless you figure out, like, put a water arrow in the holy water, and then, and then you explode them, right? Everything is a little clunky, a little scary. It doesn't do many things for you. And yet I remember it so well. And many, many games have come since then that I played them. And yeah, okay, I don't really recall much about this. So there's something about things being too convenient that's bad for us. I think that's the takeaway.
Exactly. Yeah. As you mentioned, a few months ago, my friend and I went to Italy, and for Rome, we were just following the map because that's a lot of things. But when we went to Venice and then to Como Lake, I was like, let's forget about map and just figure it out. And funny, the same day that I was there with my friends, just exploring all around, Christopher Nolan was there with a actual map, not a cell phone. So I was like, see, we're not in a bad company. But the same thing is in video games. There's this sense of experience, like, oh, I learned something about this. Oh, it was so exciting. As you were talking about your experience, it reminded me of me playing at Dragon's Dogma 2. It came out this year, and there was in that game you have to have camping packs, and I didn't have that. And if you die, you go back to your last camping pack. So it was night and dangerous, and everyone was attacking me. I was about to die. The character was exhausted, and suddenly a huge monster attacked me. I was like, all right, this is it. I'm gonna die, and I lost like an hour of experience. As I said, let's just fight this guy, and I jumped on his back, and he fell into the river. And water in that game is like, anyone go to the water, he dies. And I killed the monster, and I was still alive. I was like, oh, maybe there's a chance here. And I was just moving forward. I found a town, and I said, okay, they have a camping pack right here. And someone said, all right, a dragon just came here and destroyed our town. We have nothing. And suddenly, and it took me like 2 hours. And I was explaining it to my friend. And I was like, get this game, but this was my experience. And you're not going to have this experience, that awesome experience. But you're going to have something that you're going to tell me. And I will never have this again. And it's the sense of being lost, in sense of not... Yeah. Raph actually was a few days ago, I guess. He asked something on Twitter that do you guys like manual save or auto save? And I said manual save always gives me courage to like, okay, I'm gonna save this and do this crazy thing. No matter what happens, I'm gonna come back here and do the right thing. But if it's auto saved, I'm like, you know what? Let's just stick to the right path. I know that door is the level designer that like designed that door to be the right path, or I should follow the light here or something. But yeah, it's just sense of exploring. That's something we should have in games and real life.
Yeah, that little autosave, manual save thing is interesting because there are times when the industry has been very, very hostile to save points. but honestly, it drives a lot of risk reward. Like if you think about Elden Ring, you're taking so much risk because the game is so brutal that unless you found a site of grace and you can't get back to your ruins, sometimes you drop like enough ruins to almost level and it breaks your heart. And so the game has stakes. You have skin in the game basically. And but at the same time, I also, for games like Dishonored, letting people save anywhere means they will start taking risks. They won't just be very conservative, you know? And that's where a lot of the magic comes from, is them taking risks. So
that's
I don't think there's a right answer there. I think you can do it either way and succeed. But
exactly.
I was going to say about your Dragon's Dogma story, I always tell people the first State of Decay was a little janky, but I had such a powerful experience with it here and there. And it was because it was mostly systems and you could go do your thing and you risked so much, and they were very brutal about, you know, how you were risking things. And I always tell the story about, like, you know, I did most of the main missions and I did most of the side quests, and I had a main character that had really developed all their skills, their running and their shooting and all that. And there was the woman running the radio room kept asking, "Can you go get my dad's watch?" And I just ignored it. But it was at the very first room of the game, a ranger station, where the ranger dies, and you know, the lady is like, "When I was a little girl, my dad, I gave him this watch, stupid Mickey Mouse watch, and I know he's dead, but I would love to have it back and be very." And I just put this mission off and put this mission off because I'm very, very far in the game now. And then I'm finally like, you know, I should have done that watch mission at the start of the game. It's probably a really easy mission. I should just go do it anyway. But what I was thinking is, like, first of all, now it's very far away. Second of all, the ranger station I ignored for a long, long time. And in that game, when you ignore an infestation, it gets worse and worse and worse. And special zombies are outside. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a truck, and my main character is kind of wounded, so I'll take this woman over here is good at yoga and gardening and driving. Okay, I'll take her. Oh, she's a runner too, so she's got good endurance. And so I drive all the fucking way back to the beginning of the game, and I see this area. I'm like, holy shit. First of all, on the way, I got messed up. My truck got messed up, and I sold a new car. But I look around, I'm like, oh my God, this place is overrun with zombies and terrible. Inside, there's terrible kinds of, you know. And so I try to get in and get the watch. I managed to get the watch. She's limping now. She's barely walking. She's bleeding. She's complaining. Oh my God, my arm. You know, she's like having a miserable time. I get in the truck. It's smoking. It's about to explode. And the only way to get out of the area is to drive back and forth in the parking lot, killing some zombies. I finally run. The truck explodes. And I run. I fall down into a ravine. All I need to do is climb up the ravine. I think that's what I left out a piece. I drove all the way back, and I forgot that you can't just drive back there. There's a ravine. And so I had to leave my truck there and climb down in the ravine, which has tons of zombies moving back and forth. I climbed out, and then I got another vehicle, and I did all that. I got the watch, drove back and forth in the parking lot. Then I had to go back through the ravine. And when she finally gets back with this fucking watch, and the lady's like, "Oh, thanks. It means so much to me." And that's it, right? And you like, this character needs to rest for a few weeks because they're fucked up now. And I need to go get a different vehicle and all that. But like, my hand was just covered in sweat. My mouse pad was just wet with sweat because I was so stressed for like an hour to do that mission. And it only worked because I was improvising. And it almost went bad several times. And God, it was just one of the best experiences of that year for me in games. From this janky zombie game that otherwise was brilliant because it had the base building and the characters with deep stats. And I don't know why, but I played the one later and I didn't really like it. And I don't even know why. I think they had like matured the fetch quest system so it's more convenient and more in your face. They had taken away some of the jank, which made the magic of it, you know, like sometimes games that the Fallout games have had, very free form, very open kind of gameplay, but at the cost of, well, you can't polish everything that's open. If it's wide and deep and open, it can't also be super, super polished. Not unless you really, have a lot of people. But in any case, those games give me some of the best experiences I've ever had, just because of that free form. You've got to solve your own problems. You can combine things in interesting ways. It's really what I love,
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I love those games, but nowadays it has to be perfect. It has to be flawless, and usually linear games are able to do that because of less. They're not that big, but I don't know. But if people see some bugs in your game and like they're gonna crucify your game, like, come on, man, there are some things you can do here that no other games allow you.
Yeah, which is understandable because customers are trained on, a certain level of polish, and like you say, if they go get a brilliant linear game that's very cinematic, tells a very strong story, everything happens the same way largely for every player. Yeah. And that sets their standard for how polished and then you hand them something that is like, the fun doesn't happen unless you make it happen. Like Dishonored is a little bit of that, right? And it requires more of them. And it's a tough place to be in because games are expensive to make. Yeah. And so it's one of the reasons indie games are so good, because they can just First of all, they're constrained and they can't do everything. And second of all, they can pick a thing and try to do it really well. Yeah. And they know that I'm not going to stand out unless I have a signature art style or a story hook or a gameplay hook or all three that people haven't done over and over. I don't know him. I know a lot of game developers, but I don't know him, but I admire the work of this guy, Lucas Pope, who did Papers, Please, and The Return of the Obra Dinn or whatever. And you look at those games, and they have a very compelling narrative. They have a very distinct art style. You cannot mistake it. And they have gameplay hooks that are very powerful and lead to very emotional moments. And it's almost like the perfect indie games, right? And the bigger you make the game, the more it costs. And now you have to be very conservative to earn all that money back, because maybe your game costs, 50 million or 100 million or whatever. And you need not just a small group of aficionado people appreciating you who get it, but you need like a giant mass of people. It's very hard to balance all those forces,
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about a topic outside of gaming. What are your thoughts about aging, Harvey?
Well, I think everybody's going to answer this question the same way. Aging sucks. Nobody likes it. And, and yet at the same time, am I happier now than I was at, 28 or whatever? Probably, because I was full of anxiety. Nobody wants to hear you complain about, oh, my knee hurts now because I hurt it deadlifting or whatever. Nobody wants to hear about like, oh, it's harder to lose weight now. I gained a bunch of weight during the pandemic and it's hard to lose it. No one wants to hear I can't eat salty foods anymore because my blood pressure goes crazy. So the most useful thing to say, I think, is probably that it's kind of special that life is finite. It gives a lot of things meaning. The people you love today won't be here tomorrow, not all of them. And the people whose work you admire will pass away. I remember, I grew up loving Joan Jett, and she seems eternally youthful, But then there are other people, like we lost David Bowie and Prince in the same year. For my generation, that was like, heartbreaking. And so the most useful thing I think I can say about it is that I'm probably happier or more content is the right word. Like I probably have less zany, wild weekend experiences or whatever now. My life is a lot more stable, but I'm more content than I was 30 years ago, even because I have so much less anxiety now, and I understand the way things work, and I just have chilled, and I learned to lean on my friends emotionally, and also to support them emotionally. And I think that's kind of the message. Is like as bad as things are, you'll get through it probably. I know things are horrific politically right now, but like right before I was born or right around the time I was born, they were also horrific. You can go look at the pictures of the cops putting fire hoses on black people or putting the dogs on them or whatever horrible bullshit was going on that month, and soldiers shooting at protesting students, Kent State or whatever, like you can look at the Vietnam War, which was senseless. And just a lot of bloodshed and politicians trying to control the military. Richard Nixon kept secrets and was paranoid and was corrupt as fuck and vindictive. And you can look at all these different time periods. We're not even, and I was talking about the 20s earlier. I distracted myself for a minute because I was like, there were so many parallels leading up to the 30s and the rise of fascism and all that stuff. And like Calvin Coolidge was the president in the 20s. And if you just go look into some of that stuff, you won't feel it. You'll read it and go, oh, yeah, okay, so they had some problems too. But like you feel the ones from today, like the current guy appoints someone to be over the medical health stuff who's an anti-vaxxer and a conspiracy theorist who doesn't believe in fluoride in the water and, whatever, doesn't believe in vaccines. It's going to cause babies to die. It's going to cause diseases that were almost eliminated to rise up again and maim people, But in any case, it's been bad before and it can be good again. And part of why it seems so bad is that you look at the news constantly. And again, you're on your couch and it all comes to you. Oh, God, this building burned down in this country and all these people died or whatever. It's like that is terrible, but I'm not advocating putting your head in the sand, but it's also unhealthy to just drink from the fire hose of bad news 24/7 about things that you can't control. And so aging gives you perspective, and I know it's obnoxious and nobody wants to hear it, but there are some patterns you notice, and life is worth living. There was a moment I wasn't sure about that when I was much younger, and I'm glad I stuck it out because so many great things happened. And just so many special moments with friends, even the down moments. I drove to Wimberley yesterday, which is like a little rural area outside of town. And my friend Sergio Rosas, he runs a company called CG Bot. He's run it for 18 years. And I hired him out of college in 1994. And he was supposed to go work. We were joking about this yesterday. He was supposed to go work with Richard Garriott on the Ultimas. Then I was working on RTS with cybernetic dinosaurs and a stealth model and all this shit. It got canceled. But like when he was supposed to go work for Richard, but Richard was out of town for the Ultima series. And so he spent the day with us. I kind of gave him a tour of the company. And ultimately I realized how talented he was. He was super hot talent. Right, like he was a new artist coming out of school with an architecture background who knew Lightwave, which at the time was a 3D package that was like doing cool shit. And I was like, dude, you do not want to go work with the Ultimas on the Ultimas. You're a new artist, you'll just be making mops and buckets and mops for the next 2 years. And he was like, what? Really? Not dragons and ogres? Oh no, man, the new artists just do mops and buckets. And he was like, oh, God. And then we showed him the cybernetic velociraptor with the stealth package. And I was like, or you could be doing stuff like this. And so he joined our team. And it was like a pivotal moment for me because he's been a friend all these years. Love him. CG Bot is a great company. He went to Mexico and basically built the game industry there. Like he had to train every single person he worked with for 18 years. He had to train how to make games. None of them made games before. They were all artists coming out of school. So he set up this robust training program and all that, you know. But anyway, we went and hung out in this rural area, this cabin, and went to lunch, and I spent like 4 or 5 hours with him. And he's had down moments. I've had down moments. He's had up moments. I've had up moments. And it's just like, I remember knowing him in some of my darkest days, you know, and then like, at the time, I spent a lot of time wondering if it was worth continuing, you know, because things are so stressful, so anxiety ridden, so demoralizing. And then, you know, by sticking it out, someone makes me laugh, Raph makes me laugh, or whatever. Or I get to see a friend shine, you know, or I get to play a new game that's amazing. And then I realized, like, there are going to be downloads. You know, my career is 31 years now, and I've had 3 disastrous launches, I think, you know, but I've also had 4 moments where I was part of a team where 4 or 5, you know, like where I just thought, we changed the world. This is amazing. Everybody's still talking about this game 10 years later, 20 years later. And that's worth it, man. That's amazing. And there's a little survivorship bias here because I did get very lucky and I've been on some cool projects. And there's probably people that will listen to you that don't have that, but hopefully they have something, you know, they have something in their life, a person or a favorite book or a favorite movie or a thing they're waiting to come out, you know, to see, or, you know, and it's, aging is, it makes you reflective about all that stuff, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's like a video game. As we grow old, we get experience to deal with shit more efficient. I mean, I dream a lot. I have nightmares a lot about nuclear bombs and all that. And like 3 weeks ago or so, middle of the night, funnily, I was playing Call of Duty, like at the new Call of Duty at 8 p.m. or so. So I went to sleep. 5 a.m. I woke up with these bomb sounds, and I live in Iran, and there was a missile attack on the city. And I remember I woke up and suddenly I knew, I was like, I knew that sound. That's a Call of Duty sound. I knew that sound. And I started checking the news. Imagine just waking up in the news and, oh yeah, we're under attack. And the first thing that I said to myself, I said, I thought I'd never experienced this in my lifetime. And it was just like the nightmares that I had. But moving on the next day, so obvious that the sleep is gone. So it's just like waiting, like, is it gonna fall down now or something? But the next morning, I woke up and I feel refreshed. I feel better. And they say the nightmares you see and experience kind of like is a simulation of what's going to happen to you. And they make you ready for the real event. And it's like, oh yeah, I experienced this already. And exactly, being with friends, playing games, or like not trying to focus on the worst of it. Because as you've mentioned, it's always been there. I mean, back in like medieval era, like people didn't have Twitter or something to just know about this. Yeah. But shit was going around all the time. But
I mean, the world is probably, in general, the world is probably better today than it was back then.
Exactly.
Disease and war and all that. That doesn't mean that it's not horrible that you had missiles coming down on your city. What's going on in Gaza is horrible. You know, what happened anytime a government or a faction or a corporation, anytime those do anything evil or aggressive that hurts other people, every time a company profits from it, it's just fucked up. It's just evil. You wish it wouldn't happen anywhere. So I don't want it to happen to anyone, you know? And it's terrible that you had to live through that, that bone-chilling moment where the bombs were coming down. And in a way, if Call of Duty gave you a little comfort there, you know, a little information that helped you, you know, process it, that's interesting, you know? But yeah, I'm sorry that you had to go through that. That's,
no, but I guess
you're resilient, right? That's the thing, that if you had a kid today, you could teach them lots of things, right? Like empathy is good, of course. Autonomy is good, etc. But like resilience is one of the things that gets left out. Resilience only happens when bad shit happens to you, but you survive it. And so, like, you can try to remove all the bad stuff, but then you make very soft people. And I don't know that that's a good thing, right? Like, you want people, but life is not perfect. The world is not utopian. And so, like, you need some level of resilience just to get through your day, you know? Bad shit happens. Companies close, bombs fall, you know, projects fail, lovers break apart, you know, the relatives turn on each other over politics. But there's also so much good, you know, and your perspective on it is really interesting to me, because of what you just said about, you know, you got past that, now you have a different view of it. You hopefully you never have to deal with it again, but if you do, your mind is a little different than before, you know. Interesting.
Yeah, and I remember my father. There's this Persian poet Rumi, of course, you know about him.
Yeah.
He says that these scars you have are the holes for the light to enter. And my father told me about that, and he passed away like 4 years ago or so. And when he died, I learned a lot about life, and I was telling my friends that your parents give you birth 2 times in their life. First time when you're born, second time when they die. That's the time that you realize, oh, that's the meaning of life. So everything is just, that's another XP up there. So you can expend it on the skills and hopefully survive the next round.
Yeah, I have really divided feelings on that, because it's very powerful to hear someone say that. And I do have a few friends that are very close to their fathers or their mothers. That, like, my mom died when I was 6, and I was with her. She drug overdose. And she was like in bad shape in a way mentally, because she had been abused. And so I don't blame her or anything, but like, and then my father was very rough, you know, violent. There were all kinds of problems with him, and he eventually took his own life, you know, and we weren't close. So whenever I hear someone say, it gives me hope for, you know, kids everywhere. Like, you want to be close to your father, you want to be close to your mother, you want to love them and have a good relationship with them and be friends with them on top of the parent-child relationship. And for me, it felt like it wasn't possible for a while. And now I know a lot of people that were very close and took a lot of great lessons. And that means that if you have a child, you can be, you know, one of us as a child, we can be better. We don't have to be that villain that, you know, hits them or yells at them or does racist shit or whatever. We can be better, and we can be worth remembering and celebrated when we die. And I've never heard that expression. I've heard the Rumi quote, of course, but I've never heard the thing about they give birth to us twice, once when we're born and once when they die.
Oh, no, that's not Rumi. That was me. That was my own understanding.
Well, that's brilliant. I love it. You should write that down. Yeah, the Rumi quote about the light coming through, everybody loves that, and that's powerful, obviously. It's so interesting, by the way, just to look at the history of Iran. You know, people did the thing where they show the videos from the 70s before the sort of like theocracy tightened its grip or whatever, and it's so promising. And if you go back further, like all the mathematics and culture and art, and it just shows how fragile sometimes things like that are. But then the modern talking to you now shows how people thrive even in the face of whatever, you know. So it's so interesting, man.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. So let's end it on a high note. What's next for Harvey Smith? So how's the process of building a team and working on a new game going on?
Well, my hope is that as the funding economy in games recovers, we get what we need to make the next company, because, man, I have the most amazing partner in the world, and I have the most amazing leads team in the world, and a concept I love and believe in very much, both for the game and for the company and the culture of the company. I'm just so excited and I want to make one more big run with this company and make 3 or 4 games. And I have all these friends around me that like Raph running his company or Sergio running his company, and like I'm so proud of all of them. And it feels great. Like at Arkane, I was there 16 years, and we gave so many people their first job or their highest paying job or the best benefits they had ever had. So many people had their kids while they were there, or bought their first house while they were there, paid off their student loans, took amazing vacations. It was 16 years of just making that work for people, you know, and it's like doing that while doing something you love, even if it's hard. I think that's the whole point of, as risky as it is in the modern age where business is out of control and the pendulum needs to swing in the other direction toward supporting the people. Entrepreneurial stuff is noble when it does all those things, you know, when it does all those things responsibly. The impact on lives is amazing. Having been one of the best things about being in games 31 years now is the number of times I can say I hired this person out of college and they went on to be a friend and a champion developer and made their own company or their own game, even eventually if they left, you know. It's a very high number now. And I love so many people that I've worked with across the industry, you know, from Carnegie Mellon or Full Sail or Wake Forest or all these different schools. And we work with a guy named Ihsan, who's from Iran. I don't know if you know him, but he ran his own company.
I think I know him. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. I don't mean to imply all Iranians would know all Iranians, but like you probably know Iranian video game companies. And Ihsan ran a game company for a while and did amazing, beautiful things, and was a great guy to work with at Arkane. And just people from all over the world, you know, like there's a guy we worked with from Germany who was just a rock star talent. You know, there's a producer who was one of the best young producers we'd ever worked with, and had a baby right at, you know, near the end of the stuff with Arkane, and then bounced back and is ready to be, you know, producer extraordinaire on the next thing. Now with this, you know, little baby in tow. And it's just like all the experiences that you see, all the lives, and all the effort, all the passion, trying to bring these games to life while also living your life and doing your thing and raising your family and all that stuff. It's just like, it is humbling, honestly, you know, to think back and to have been a part of this so far. But I want to do 10 more years, and then we can do another podcast or something.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harvey. Everyone knows you as one of the most influential figures in the game industry. Your career is filled with innovation, risks, and monumental achievements. But after talking to you today, I've learned even more about your kindness, understanding, and unique perspective on the world. So thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you. That is very kind. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Good luck.